Good morning and welcome to the ILSOI Advisor webinar, Prevent Plant Considerations for Soybean Growers, brought to you by the Illinois Soybean Checkoff. I'm Jill Seiler and I will be moderating the webinar this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping items to start with. You can ask questions during this presentation by submitting them using the chat feature in the dashboard on the right side of your screen. We will have time to answer questions at the end of the presentation. Please keep them brief and to one point. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Gary Schnitkey. He is a professor and farm management specialist in the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and regularly contributes content to FarmDoc Daily. Schnitkey focuses on farm management and risk management by examining issues impacting the profitability of grain farms, including corn-soybean rotations, machinery economics, and factors separating profitable and unprofitable farms. He grew up on a grain and hog farm in Northwest Ohio and received his Bachelor of Science degree from The Ohio State University and his master's degree and PhD from the University of Illinois. I'll let you take it from here, Gary.
Thank you, and welcome to this webinar dealing with Prevent Plant Considerations for Soybeans. I'm sorry about the circumstances that we're here, but we're here and we're going to try and help you make decisions relative to prevent plant decisions on your farms. I am going to handle those decisions, if I can figure out how to advance the slide. There we go. We're going to go through this in the following three-step process. And these three steps follow what I think is going to be the sequential nature of prevent plant decisions on most farms. We're going to start with the intended corn acre. And by that I mean we have acres that you intended to plant to corn, and now it's questionable about whether you're going to plant those acres to corn. You have two decisions on those acres immediately. You can take a preventive planting on that corn or still plant corn. On that intended corn acre, you also have the decision to plant soybeans or take preventive planting on that corn acre and plant to soybeans after the late planting period. We're going to deal with those questions on item 3 there. You have a intended corn acre and you've not planted the corn. In my opinion, the first decision probably in the preventive planting cycle you're going to make is I'm going to stop planting corn, and that's item 1. Item 2, you got soybean acres that you intended to plant soybeans. We have not reached the final plant date on those. Those final plant dates are June 15th and June 20th, so we stood still from an insurance standpoint, and I believe from an economic standpoint, plant those soybeans if it's fit to plant those soybeans. After we reach that final plant date, June 15th and June 20th, we can then take a preventive plant payment on soybeans, or we can still plant soybeans. And again, we'll talk about that. Finally, in number 3, we'll come back to that intended corn acre and see that we haven't planted the corn and see whether we should plant that corn. Still continue to take the prevent plant on the corn or plant soybeans, or maybe wait till after the late planting period and plant soybeans again. I would suggest that you talk to crop agents earlier rather than later. Right now you can claim preventive planting on corn because we have reached the final plant date on corn, but we're not there on soybeans yet, June 15th and June 20th. You have till 72 hours after the late planting period, which will be the end of June in most cases, to file that claim. Again, what we're starting out here with those corn decisions, and my numbers or calculations would say that if we're looking right now, and this graph shows corn, soybeans, it's for a specific example, but you could run a lot of different examples. Corn is likely to be more profitable than soybeans until roughly June 21st, sort of the date, and we have some yield declines built in here. Frankly, though, if you have crop insurance, what's probably more important than these yield declines is what's happening to your guarantee. If you have RP crop insurance, what's happening to that guarantee, and if once we reach that late planting period, is probably more important to the decision than what's happening to the expected yield on those farms, because the yield, the RP, and again, most of you have RP, is going to be more driving expected returns than the yield decline, because both of those are going down. So that's what's driving us to think about the corn acres first and when we stop planting corn acres. A couple of other details that we have this year that have come up this year is our 2019 MFP payment, Market Facilitation Program payment. That program has been announced, and it has been clarified that that is only going to apply to on a per planted acre basis. So MFP payments will only apply to planted acres, not prevented planted acres. We do not, and I will say this, we do not know what the rate for that is going to be per county, and it is going to be a rate per county. So whether you plant corn or you plant soybeans, it's going to be the same per acre rate. So if that MFP payment does not influence the decision to plant corn or soybeans, it will influence the decision about whether you take the prevent plant payment or plant one of those two crops. To give you a feel for that standard rate, last year, the 2018 program, we would have averaged $50 per acre across Illinois if we took the soybean payment, corn payment, and came up with a per acre rate. That would have varied by county from $30 up to $80, and now we can speculate, that's just giving you a ballpark here. You can speculate that that program payment will be lower than that, and you can speculate that it's going to be higher than that. There's more money announced for it, but there's more crops as well. In my presentation, I am going to be using a $50 average, and again, that's just putting a number in there. This MFP payment is going to be paid in 3 tranches, July, and the November and January ones are not for certain. The July one is, November and January, and again, we do not know what the rates are. At the same time that we're looking at that, we have a disaster assistance program package that's working its way through regulations. It's been passed by Congress. As far as I know, it might have got signed this morning or late last night, but it's been not signed by Trump. That's not likely to be a hurdle, but the regulations have not been determined by USDA. There are provisions in that bill that would allow the prevent payment factor, which is currently standard at 55% corn for corn, 60% on soybean, to be increased to 90% at the discretion of Secretary of the USDA. It also allows for the use of higher of the projected or harvest price in calculations of the prevent plant payment. Currently, if we get a prevent plant payment, it's only based on the projected price, not the harvest price. Our reading of the bill would say that it will not apply to most Illinois counties, but it could be otherwise. They could decide to apply it to all counties or all the Midwest. If they do that, though, it's not likely to be that 90% because they'll simply run out of funds. If it's applied, I think what will happen, and again, I'm speculating here, is that there will be roughly the same payment as the 2019 payment. Again, that's my thoughts about what that might look like. We haven't seen the regulations, and we won't know what that looks like for quite a while. So those two things are in the black backdrop here. I'm going to say we're going to, my calculations are going to use a $50 MFP payment. Could be high, could be low, and I'm going to say that the prevent plant payment factors or prevent plant payments are not going to change from what they are currently. Again, where we're at, we have reached the final plant date for corn. You can still plant corn. The final plant date for most of Illinois is June 5th, except for the southern counties, the southern seven counties, they're May 31st. Once we reach that final plant date, it's up to the farmer. You can take the prevent plant payment. Conditions don't matter now. You can take the prevent plant payment, or you can plant corn, or you can plant soybeans for that matter on those corn intended acres. This big thing to note is there's going to be a 1% decline each day that we're in the plant program. The guarantee is going to go down 1% per day, and that's a big deal. In about a week from now, if you bought an 85% coverage level, it's roughly equivalent to 80%. 2 weeks, it'll be worth 85%. Original will be 75%. At the end of 20 days, it goes to 60%. Same thing for soybeans, but we have not reached the final plant date. Those are June 15th for the northern tier of counties and June 20th for central and southern Illinois. Again, to reiterate, once we reach the final plant date, and again for soybeans that's a little bit in the future, June 15th, June 20th, we can take preventive planting, and then we have this, and we can do that during the late planting period. That happens to be 20 days for corn, 25 days for soybeans. Again, you can plant, but your crop insurance guarantee goes down 1% per day, and after the late planting period, the insurance guarantee will be 60% of the original. The prevent plant payment will be 55% of the guarantee for corn, 60% for soybeans. Those prevent plant payments will be paid on RP, YP, and RP with harvest price exclusion. And actually, it doesn't matter which of those three you have, it'll be the same payment. If you purchase SCO, it won't be on SCO. And if you have ARP, RP or ARP, AYP or ARP, those do not have prevent plant provisions in them. So we're only looking at the RP policies as having prevent plant payments. And again, you take the guarantee, multiply it by 55% for corn, 60% for soybeans. Some of you might have bought up. You could have had for soybeans, rather than 60%, you could have had a 65%. Similarly, 55 to 60, have that higher level, prevent plant program payments will be higher. Again, where we're at, acres intended for corn. We now are in the late planting period all across the state. For most of the state, June 6th to June 25th. During that period, you can take prevent payments on corn, plant corn, or plant soybeans. If you're going to plant soybeans on those acres intended for corn, most of the cases you will want to have all the acres into soybeans that were intended for soybeans. That occurs because if we're going to take prevent plant payments, we most likely want to take them on corn acres because that corn program has higher payments. After the late planting period, we can plant soybeans, and we're going to talk about this. This could be a good option this year. Good, I guess, is a relative sort of thing, but because MFP only goes to those acres that are planted, this may get us our planted acres here. Again, for soybeans, June 15th through 20th, we should really be still trying to plant all of our soybean acres. And after we reach June 15th through June 20th, the items I'm going to consider is take prevent plant payments on soybeans or plant soybeans. You actually have other alternatives. You could plant corn on your acres intended for soybeans once you reach that date, but these seem to be the most likely that you're going to be thinking about. All right, again, I'm going to now go through my hierarchy with that background, and we're going to start with our intended corn acre. One of the things that you will want to make sure of is that you have acres eligible for both corn and soybean prevent plant payments. And that eligibility is based on the highest acres in the last 4 years. So if you have an insurance unit, the highest numbers of acres you planted to that crop will be the number of acres you have for eligible for prevent plant payments. And you want to make sure that those acres are there. It would be pretty sorry to decide you're going to take prevent plant payment on corn and not have corn acres, and the same thing for soybeans. All right, so we're going to look at this decision first. The numbers that I'm going to use here, and I'm going to do a specific example here. Corn, 85% RP at a 220 bushel trend adjusted APH, and soybeans at 85% RB at a 65 bushel trend adjusted APH. If we have bought the 55% prevent planting payment factor, or the usual one, we would get a $411 payment. If I subtract $40 of cost, which includes some sort of weed control and the crop insurance payment, that would have a $371 net return. Soybean payment will be 60%, unless you bought 65, again, times the coverage level. Our projected price for soybeans is $9.54 this year, so the $9.54 is our projected price. I'm using the 65 bushel trend adjusted APH yield, $276 net return. On most of the farms, your farms, the soybean prevent plant payment is going to be less than the corn. Having said that, there are exceptions to that rule. So you're going to, if we're looking at prevent plant payments, you're going to want to make sure what those are, because there's some cases where a farm will have a 65 trend adjusted APH for soybeans and maybe very low for corn. And you want to make sure that soybeans is lower than corn, because if you look at my hierarchy, it's going to drive you to take this corn preventive plant payment rather than the soybean because it's the larger one. Again, we're not to the final plant date for soybeans, so we can't take those yet. We should be planting soybeans. And again, corn payment usually higher than soybeans. So what that's going to drive you to do is take the corn payment rather than the soybean payment. I'm going to also use the following factors. I'm going to say we have $470 per acre to incur yet for corn, $260 for soybeans. This really does matter. 470 acres for corn, I'm assuming no nitrogen has been applied, no pesticides. I'm going to run an example where there's $350 for corn because that will make a difference. And again, I'm going to run a $50 MFP payment. I don't know that number. It could be higher than that. One way to judge that on your individual farm is average what you got last year, and probably the highest that could be is 50% higher. All right, you have this decision. Take preventive planting on corn or plant corn. Here is the items that you would be looking at. I can take my prevent plant payment on corn. Using the numbers I showed before, you would have $371 net return. Couple items to note about this, and this will be the same for soybeans. It's certain. Once you sign up for prevent plant, put in your planning reports, you know what that is. And there's going to be no impact on APH yield. If you do not plant a crop, it will not impact your APH yield. The only way that if you take a corn prevent plant payment that you're going to lower your APH yield is if you plant soybeans to it after the late planting period. All right, so there's the corn prevent plant payment. Now let's talk about plant corn. I'm going to give a break even that we have to cover these costs to be better off than taking the prevent plant payment on corn. We have to generate $841 of revenue. Where that $841 of revenue comes from is there's a $371 prevent plant payment, and we have $470 of cost. That's my assumption. If you have less than that, this number would obviously be less. I'm going to subtract the $50 MFP, and there's our $791 of revenue, and we got to cover that from crop sales or crop insurance. All right, so we got to cover that from crop sales or crop insurance. And just to give you a feel here, if we have a $4 cash price, we would need 197 bushels to cover that. If we have a $4.50 corn price, we would have to have 175 bushels to cover that, and a $5 price, 158 bushels. These last two situations would generate crop insurance payments, and these numbers, this bushel number, doesn't include that. So that gives you a feel for the revenue that has to be covered, and part of that's going to come from crop sales, and part of that's going to probably come from crop insurance. But the part that comes from crop insurance is going to depend on your coverage level that you've chosen, because the lower that coverage level, the less the crop insurance product will pay. And crop insurance, the guarantee is going to go down as we go through the preventive planting period. And here's an example. This orange line gives what happened to the prevent plant payment as we're going, or excuse me, the blue line gives what's happening to the prevent plant, or excuse me, the guarantee on corn, yield guarantee. We can state it as a yield guarantee if we have RP. It's going to go down 1% per day. So as we get later in the season, our crop insurance is going to make lower payments if we have losses, same losses. It falls here from June 25th to June 26th. This is when we go to the 60% guarantee, and then it stays constant. So the incentive is for both corn and soybeans is to plant earlier in the period. Let me just give you an example for this 220 bushel APH of what the expected returns from prevent plant, and again that remains constant here. And here's returns for planting corn, given the yield declines that I showed in the previous slide. This line is for a $4 cash price, $4.25 harvest price. If we have full costs yet to incur about June 6th, June 7th, we take the prevent plant payment looks better than planting. If we have higher prices, this would be this line was $4.50 cash price, $4.75 harvest price. I'm building a 25-cent basis in here. This would be your harvest price, and I'm assuming this cash price is what we're looking at in October. We would be going out to June 15th or so before that looks less attractive. Here's for $5 cash price, $5.25 harvest price, and we're getting a lot of payment. What's happening here is we're getting, if you look at this kink, this is where crop insurance, the guarantee is what's causing those payments to occur. If you're planting corn much before, even into next week, you're believing or that prices for corn are going to rise. Right now, they're actually closer to this line than this line. We have not seen much market reaction to this late planting. So planting 6th, 7th, even middle and beginning next week, at this coverage level, full cost, you're believing or betting on, and it's not necessarily a bad bet, but higher prices in the future. Just to give you a feel here, I've been showing a slide for 220 bushels. Here's what those look for different coverage levels. As we lower the coverage level, the incentive to plant. This is plant corn return minus prevent plant return. It goes up. But as we lower our APH, the incentives to plant go down. And the reasons why it's going down, and this happens to be at a $4.50 price, the reason why it's going down is we're assuming still the cost remain the same as we lower the APH. So if you have full cost, it's going to be middle. If you believe what's happening, our yield curves early to middle next week, it's net returns from planting corn likely don't exceed that from preventive plant unless we have a price increase. You still have, let's say now you have $350 of cost to incur rather than our $470 in the last case, then you can push that out earlier, or the dates go out later. Less cost, more incentive to plant. All right, so now we're at the point. Sometime you decide to stop planting corn. You have to base that on if prices don't rise, it's early next week, maybe even close to now. All right, if you have all intended corn acres planted, good. If you don't, we're going to wait to step 3 to see if we should plant those to soybeans. We're going to look at those intended soybean acres now, and if we have acres that we can take for planting corn, the decision on those acres is going to differ from the intended soybean acre. Again, if we're before the final plant date, we should be planting it if it's fit from a crop insurance standpoint, and after the final plant date, which is June 15th or June 20, we can take the prevent plant payment on soybeans or plant soybeans. Again, if I look at it from an economic standpoint, and we're not to those prevent plant payments yet, it seems to me the numbers that I run, plant soybeans is both good from an economic standpoint and from an insurance standpoint. After the final plant date, June 15th, for Northern Illinois, that's the end of Saturday of next week. We have a little bit more time in Central and Southern Illinois. The prevent planting option for soybeans comes into play. I'm going to make a comparison now from taking a prevent plant payment on soybeans and comparing it to continue to plant. Again, I'm going to use 85% RP. That's key. 80%, this number would go down. 65 trend adjusted APH and full cost yet to incur. We have $276 of net return there. Again, that will be a certain payment. If we take the prevent plant payment on soybeans, there will be no impact on APH. The acres in prevent plant will not influence your APH for future years. The acres you do plant will. So the acres that you plant will determine what will the 2019 yield be. All right, if we plant soybeans, it will again impact the APH, and here's my break even. So if we plant soybeans, we have to cover the $276 we could have got from the prevent plant plus our soybean cost. And again, these are costs yet to be incurred. They're not the full cost. We're not, for example, putting overhead or cash rent in there because there's going to remain, we're assuming those remain the same whether we take the prevent plant payment or plant soybeans. $536 of revenue, $50 MFP payment, we would have to have $486 in revenue from crop sales and or crop insurance. Again, I don't know what that MFP payment is. I'm just sticking something in there that seems quasi-reasonable to me. We have an $8 cash price. We would need 60 bushels of beans to cover this versus taking that $276 payment. $8.50, $57, 57 bushels per acre. 9 cash price, 54 bushels per acre. Again, these do not include crop insurance payments. And crop insurance could generate payments this year. And let me just illustrate that for this example, 65 bushel trend adjusted APH. Let's say the first 3 columns here are yields of 55 bushels per acre. We have an $8.50 harvest price. I'm building a 40 cents basis in here. Here's a $9 price, $9.50. All of those are still below our $9.54 projected price. For soybeans, I'm building in prices lower than the projected price. For corn, most of those were higher. You can see here, even at 55 bushel yield, we're getting crop insurance payments. And the reason why, particularly at the $8.50, we have a $9.54 projected price. $8.50 is below that, so that's contributing to our loss. Or to our crop loss, and our crop insurance will make a payment. Here's our 50 MFP, and you can see our net return here is $291, relatively the same as long as our harvest price is below the projected price. Same thing for 45 bushel yield, same prices, and you can see here net returns are really close to one another. You got a little basis thing going on here. But those are the returns. Here would be the net return from the soybean prevent plant payment. Again, this is 65 bushels for trend adjusted yield. When we do those calculations, the soybean return exceeds the prevent plant payment, and given the yields that I'm using, it's the revenue guarantee that's going down that's causing. Because as our revenue guarantee goes down, this crop insurance payment goes down. Soybean returns exceed prevent plant payment until about 8 days after the final plant date. June 15th in northern Illinois, 8 days. June 20th in central and southern Illinois. And again, the numbers that I'm using would say we're going to get prevent plant payments. Those are my numbers. Here is a more of a simple way, I guess, to look at it. We have $276 of net return from prevent planting payment. If you want to do this for your own situation, here's what I would suggest. Takes a cash price guarantee, $9.54 is a projected price, and subtract off a basis. I've been using 40 cents, $9.14 for the cash price. Take your yield guarantee, or your trend adjusted APH yield, multiply it by your coverage level, and then as you get away from the final plant date, this number here, that 2%, will go 0.03, 0.04, 0.05, come up with this number here. Here's our cash insurance guarantee. We're using insurance, we're guaranteed $494. Actually, from this, you would really want your yields to be lower, because we are substituting, in my example, the lower the yield is below this APH, you're substituting a higher price, likely from the futures market for a cash basis. And here, cash insurance guarantee plus $50 MFP, $260. And again, just make those comparisons here. Again, from most of the examples that I run, you keep planting soybeans till about 6 to 8 days after the final plant date. Let's go to the last one. All right. So you go through there. and hopefully you get all your soybean acres planted. Now, let's say we have acres left that where we could take the prevent plant payment on corn, and now you're looking at whether I should substitute those for soybeans. I would be very cautious about substituting a corn prevent plant payment for planting soybeans. And again, we're going to start with just planting soybeans before the late planting period. All right, so we're back to corn, June 5th. If June 5th is our final plant date, if we plant soybeans before June 25th on a corn intended acre, we get the soybean, we don't get the corn prevented plant payment. I would be very cautious about switching that corn prevent plant acre to soybeans, and here's why. Same calculations, but in most cases, our prevent plant payment for corn is $90 to $100 acre higher than for soybeans. So we could be getting, for prevent plant, in my example, $276, we go to corn, $371. That $90 difference makes it really hard to cover those payments. So just to give you an example here, we now substitute $371 plus $260, $631. Now at an $8 corn price, we have to have 72 bushels, $850, $68, $9, $64. And it's really difficult with crop insurance, even with the revenue guarantee, to get above this. So it really does matter when you're comparing prevent plant decisions for soybeans, whether you're comparing a corn prevent plant acre to a soybean prevent plant acre. Final option, we still have not planted all our corn acres. We could come back after the late planting period, which is June 25th in most counties, June 20th in the southern 7 counties. We could plant soybeans on that corn prevent plant acre. The reason why that comes into play, again, is because MFP is only going to be paid on planted acres. And so there may be cases where this works out to be the better alternative. It would be nice to know what the MFP payments are going to be, but we don't know those. Here's what that alternative would look like. You have to plant soybeans after the late planting period. So June 25th for most of Illinois, June 20th for the last lower 7 counties. You only get 35% of the prevent plant payment, and you pay 35% of the corn premium. That's true unless there's a double crop soybean history, and then there's a possibility that you can get the whole payment. So if you have double crop soybeans, this alternative may look much better. And if you have double crop soybeans, you really need to take a look at this. I'm assuming here that the MFP is available on corn prevent plant farmland. We have not seen any regulations about this. You will have a hit to the APH yield for corn because they're going to use 60% of your approved yield for the 2019 yield if you follow this option. And the APH yield for soybeans actual yield will enter the history. We do find that this is competitive with taking corn, but we really need to see what those regulations are, and so hopefully we'll get more information about the MFP payment and the disaster assistance program before we have to make this decision. Just as we'll keep putting articles on FarmDoc, and we also have 3 webinars scheduled, June 12th, 19th, and 26th. If you sign up for our email list, you'll see these webinars. This 26th one, we're anticipating that there'll be some people in that decision, so we'll be talking about that then, maybe June 19th. Again, hopefully we'll have more information as we go through this growing season, and we'll be providing more information on webinars and also on our Farm Doc Daily article. We also have available a fast spreadsheet, and that's on preventive planning model. It's for comparing returns and cost, and you can use that to look at alternatives. That's all I have, and I imagine there's a lot of questions. So we thank you for your time and wish you well. So questions here.
Yes, thank you, Gary, for that great presentation and breaking out all of the options and resources that growers have available to them. We do have a few questions to start with here. And the first one is, can a grower take prevent plant on 10% of a field if those acres have standing water on them, or is it by field basis? Can you break it out by acreage that is having problems?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and if you have an insurance unit, you can break out the problem areas. The requirement is that for an insurance unit, for it to have a preventive planning payment or be eligible for prevent plant, at least 20 acres or 20% of the acres in the unit have to be taken for prevent plant. So there's a lower acreage limit. So if you have an insurance unit so you gotta, on most insurance units that are over 100 acres, you have to have at least 20 acres in that are preventive plant. So yes, there's an acreage limit, and you can work areas of the field taking prevent plant, but you gotta meet that lower limit, 20% of the acres in the unit or 20 acres.
Excellent. You talked about the taking prevent plant and then planting to soybeans after that late planting date. Is there any limitations on if you're not planting back to soybeans, if you're planting to a summer annual or a cover crop? Are there insurance limitations on that?
All right, and so if you take a prevent plant payment, you can plant a cover crop. You can plant a cover crop on those acres that you are taking preventive planting. You cannot, at this point, hay or graze it before November 1. So you can plant cover crops on those acres, but you cannot hay or graze them or use it for livestock feed till November 1. If you hay or graze them, you have the potential for eliminating your prevent plant payment, and actually it depends on the date you planted it. If you plant the cover crop after the late planting period and then hay or graze it before November 1, you get 35% of the prevent plant payment. Having said all of that, there is working through the way our Congress, a number of letters have been sent to USDA suggesting that they eliminate that November 1 deadline. At this point, though, if you have a cover crop, just assume that you can't hay or graze it till November 1. And if you want to do something before November 1, talk to your crop insurance agent about it, because you could eliminate your prevent plant payment.
Excellent. Going back to this question we asked about the percentage of the fields being 20% or 20 acres of that insurance unit. So if a grower has 10 fields and they have a total area of 20% for prevent plant, but that's spread across those fields, is that based on if the fields are together in one insurance unit?
You should ask your crop insurance agent about that, but my assumption is that if any place in the acres in the unit will meet that requirement. But ask your agent that for sure.
Great. And then we've got a few days here to get into the field, and with the good weather, farmers will be, I'm sure, planting corn and soybeans. But if a farm has limited resources, because corn has already passed that final planting date, should they plant corn acres first, or should they plant corn and soybeans together?
All right, that's a good question. And that's a really good question. So you can take what I'm going to tell you with a grain of salt. If you're going to plant corn acres, I would get it done really quickly. I would put, if you want to plant corn acres, I would plant them as soon as possible. And the reason, well, not only for yield losses, but every day you wait, your crop insurance guarantee is going down. Whereas we're not there yet for the soybean guarantee going down. I think the way it looks to me like we're going to get a lot of crop insurance payments both for corn and soybeans unless something changes pretty dramatically. So that crop insurance guarantee going down is really critical. So from that perspective, I would plant corn first and then go to soybeans. Again, sometime pretty soon here, you're going to decide that corn acres aren't worth pursuing because our crop insurance guarantee has gotten low enough. So I would emphasize corn if you're going to plant it.
Excellent. Kind of along that same vein, during your presentation, you talked about how it makes sense to take prevented plant 6 to 8 days, or it makes sense to plant beans overtaking prevented plant 6 to 8 days into that late planting window. Is the advice generally the same for corn, or is it based more on when you will see that yield reduction?
Yeah, and again, I'm giving you my gut feel here, but I think you can go further in the planting period for soybeans. I think corn is 6 to 8 days, probably pretty good, but you're probably shorting it up some, particularly if you have not incurred any cost. If you haven't incurred any cost, if you're planting corn now, even you're betting that the harvest price is going to be higher than the market is saying it's now, which could, the market situation is really sort of interesting. We could have a short crop situation for corn and abundant acres of soybeans. That could happen. And so I would be getting that corn in quickly.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then we talked about the Market Facilitation Program and the disaster bill. Can you just kind of summarize quickly what those programs will and how they will affect the planting decisions?
Yeah. So let me go back there. The MFP program, and we do know this. To get an MFP payment, you need to plant the acre. If you take preventive planting, you will not get the MFP payment. Unfortunately, we do not know what the MFP payment rate is per county. The way the MFP payment is going to be administered this year, whether you plant corn or soybeans, if you plant an acre of corn in Champaign County or soybeans in Champaign County, it's going to get the same MFP payment. So the MFP payment won't influence corn, or it has less of an impact on whether you plant corn or soybeans. It will influence whether you take preventive planting or not. And I am using here a $50 number, and again, I've seen people use much higher than that and other lower than that. The disaster assistance would make preventive planning more attractive. And again, we're not going to know those regulations for a while. I would bet and now not much, but I would bet that MFP payment's going to be close to the same as the MFP payment if it comes into being. If it applies to a lot of acres, there's no way that it could be up to 90% of the preventive plant payment factor. So, but we don't know if it's going to apply widespread, and we don't know the increase. So, it's kind of, all of my examples assume that it did not change the prevent plant payments, and yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of decisions for growers to make, and as things rapidly change, it'll be important to stay on top of this. We don't have any further questions for this afternoon or this morning, but I would just want to thank you, Gary, for joining us and providing this presentation. It will be available. The recording will be available on illsoyadvisor.com after we wrap up here this morning. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Gary or ILSOY Advisor, and we'll get those routed to him. And we just, again, want to thank you, Gary, for the excellent presentation you provided this morning. You can find other soybean and agronomic resources on the checkoff-funded website, ILSOY Advisor. That concludes the presentation for this morning. Thank you for attending, and have a great day.